Sofia, and I am the community manager here at Uxcel. I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, where we will be talking about what UX looks like in large scale systems. You know that as systems grow larger, so do our problems. So, together, we will unpack those challenges and find out a couple of strategies, tools, and resources that will help you not only survive but also help you navigate and succeed in these spaces, let's say. So we've set aside the last 15 minutes of the webinar just for your questions. You can go ahead and drop them in the comments below anytime during the webinar, and also upvote the ones that you would like us to answer. Before we jump in the introductions and before I invite our special guest today on stage, just to let you know that we've set aside 15 minutes of the webinar. I would like to ask you all where you are all tuning in from. Drop the questions below and drop also your flags and say hi. So let me remove this. So as you know, today I'm very excited to invite our guest and also to welcome him. But before we do that, I would like to introduce you a little bit to him in case you don't know. He is none other than Vitaly Friedman. He is the founder of Smashing Magazine, an online hub for web developers and web designers. And he's also one of the leading UX voices out there. He has over 19 years of experience in the field and has been helping big, small organizations, mid-sized organizations, from Zalando to European Parliament, really craft better digital experiences. And he's not just about theory, he is hands-on, solving real UX problems and coming up with solutions to some really complex problems. So lots of knowledge with him. I can't wait to pick his brains. And, he's also written books, he runs workshops, and he has put together this great UX knowledge library, video library for UX professionals called Smart Interface Design Patterns. Check it out if you haven't already. And, what really sets him apart is his talent for creating digital products and experiences that users genuinely love. So without further ado, please welcoming Vitaly.
Hello, Sophia. Hello. It's wonderful to see you here and everybody else, of course, as well.
Hi, Vitaly. It's really nice to see you here. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, how are you doing?
Oh, this has been a hell of a week, and it's just about, I think it's just starting. It's just Tuesday. It feels like it's already late Saturday or something. Oh my God, this was a very eventful event. Usually it's supposed to be very calm. Very calm. August, what's happening in August? This August is a bit different. And of course, welcome everyone who is joining us from remote and not very remote parts of the world. It's fantastic to see you all here. So very excited about this. What about yourself, Sophia, by the way? How are you doing today?
Super excited about this. And the heat is really getting to me right now, but hopefully I will survive. Serbia has been really, really hot these days. So
that's right.
Yeah, but I'm excited about our talk. And yeah, I would love to jump straight in if you're up for it.
Absolutely, of course.
Awesome. So for those who are joining us for the first time and who might not know, how would you define large-scale systems?
So that's a great question, actually, because I think for a very long period of time, Sophia, I was always thinking, you know what? UX is fine. At this point, especially when we look in 2024, we know how to design a great button. Look at all the wonderful people here. If we just put all this incredible energy in designing a perfect button, that button will go in history as the best button in the world. And then also like landing page. I think like when it comes to landing page, we can kind of design a landing page. We kind of got to the point where we're pretty good at it. But then very often in the last decade or so, 8, 10 years, I ended up working in very different environments where buttons matter, but not as much as they do, for example, in our conversations that are happening between us designers every now and again. Um, and it's the landing pages, the things like that. They're all that's kind of a story that we still need to optimize and need to have. But very often, I end up working in very different spaces. And these spaces are really complex to me because they involve kind of a really weird combination. I think that many people who are joining us here today will be in the same place. Could be B2B, could be this enterprise world where we have a lot of people involved, a lot of stakeholders involved, like maybe literally layers of stakeholders on different levels. And then you also have a lot of different roles and permissions and settings, like customization, personalization. On top of that, you also maybe have really, really complex amount of data that you can operate with, meaning you can import, you can export, you have these massive data grids and tables, nested filters, dependencies. All the things make it just really, to me personally, when I look at it, it just feels like you are in front of a giant. That's really what it feels like. And what I mean by that really is that you have absolutely no idea what's going on. An example of that would be something like, healthcare. It would be something like banking applications, insurance companies, all this internal software that powers the world that actually makes up for a vast majority of all applications out there. Yet it's actually quite rare that we will find like a really detailed, let's say, case study about how somebody, small or large, redesigned or rebuilt or refactor or changed in any way a B2B product, or because you often have NDAs, you often have intellectual property discussions, you cannot reveal anything. So it's like this magical box. A lot of stuff is happening there. It's really, really difficult to figure out what is what. Even, I know it's a very long answer, but even the language that they're speaking there
Yeah.
in this kind of environment, very different. So if you look at, let's say, our language, where we speak about empowering users, when we speak about developing empathy, like things like that, it's just not understood as a concept in many of those environments. Not only because of the low UX maturity or anything like that, it's just a different world. They speak about very different terms. And again, an example I always bring up, and I do apologize for bringing this, but because it might create some really daunting memories for some people here, but I always look very carefully at dentist applications. I really do. So I think that it might be a good choice for everybody who is joining us on the call to choose your dentist based on the application that they're using. Very often, the applications are incredibly old, broken, slow, confusing, and all of that. And the chance of making a mistake there is quite high. So maybe, this is at least my theory to life. I pick my dentists similar to, and pretty much, anybody else based on the digital experience that they have to deal with every day. So that's because in many ways, that example, that presentation of data and all of that is quite complex because you have no idea what's going on there. So for me, anything that's real in this really messy, complex, enterprise people world, that's quite complex.
Interesting. So, what do we do when our dentists don't have applications? Do we run away?
Yeah, well, I think hopefully you have a choice in your dentist. But I would say, I mean, I'm actually not joking because sometimes you end up with hospitals which have just incredibly outdated software that kind of does the job, but then it's also quite easy to make a mistake there. And so I would be very careful on that. And I think that in many ways, I would love us as a community to spend more time really thinking and discussing and debating and finding ways to make this first-class healthcare experiences, for example, right? It doesn't have to be dentists alone. Maybe somebody don't like dentists. That's okay, I guess. Right? But in general, I think there's a lot of stuff that we still need to figure out, and that's usually is not in landing pages or e-commerce site. I do respect, of course, people who work on landing pages and e-commerce site, and no question there. There is still a lot of work to do, but also a lot of work is happening in those areas which are. And there are incredible designers trying to do the best they can,
Yeah.
but it's really difficult to learn anything about that space. It's almost like the other side of the UX world, often forgotten and often overlooked.
That's true. Often forgotten and often overlooked. I agree. Yet they're very important. Thank you. And what would you say that are, you mentioned it, it's like this big giant we are seeing, but what are some of, like, maybe we can go maybe a little bit more in detail. What are some challenges that are unique just to large scale system compared to the smaller ones?
Yeah, I
And
think
what
that
is your approach?
yeah, sure. I think very often what we end up what ends up happening with this kind of systems, what you also get is basically uh, a huge set of limitations. You cannot speak to users not because they are holy creatures and you cannot talk to them because they are out there and you are in here, but often because there is not enough of them. Maybe there are none of them altogether because maybe you're working on some little product that's going to be integrated in some larger product. The only thing you can do and try to do is to understand the landscape and both kind of understand the domain. That usually requires an incredible amount of time and effort. Like if somebody drops me in a healthcare environment, I will have absolutely no idea what this represents for, let's say, even a dentist application. I just wouldn't know what are the user needs that doctors have with a dental application. I have no idea. So there will be a lot of this exploration that will be very much needed, right? To even try to make sense of what is in front of you. And what I always try to do, and I can only recommend it to everybody who is going to join us, who is joining us on the call, going to watch this later. You always need to find somebody who is willing to help you succeed, and not because you are so important and they just want you to succeed, but because ultimately you are helping them succeed as well. And I would really come to them and say, can you just show me what you're doing here? Just walk me through this interface, this software, this product. And I would come to another person who is maybe using this product as well. Say, can you do the same? And then you do this multiple times. Just walk me through the features that you're using. Like, what are some of the typical tasks you're doing here? And show me how you do that. Not just like an interview in a chair-to-chair situation, like, hey, what are you doing here in this kind of work? But really guiding me through so I can see maybe there are certain things that are more problematic than others. I think that really seeing people trying to complete something and maybe failing or maybe succeeding or maybe struggling in one way or the other, that's always a starting point for me, like always. And then as you kind of get into this motion of actually trying to understand what they're doing, I would try to write it down. I mean, this is my way of doing this, but everybody else could be following something similar. I just try to write down how I see it, and then I need to reflect it back to my stakeholders who have hired me to do the work. Say, so that's what we have. Is that true? Does it accurately represent this environment in which we're operating? And the reason why I'm doing it, not just to understand it, because the way whenever you kind of write it down, you kind of have to really understand what you're doing there, but also to gain a bit of their trust, because if you come in as an external, why should they trust you?
Yeah.
Sure, you have maybe some credentials here and there, but they never worked with you before, and you are not an expert in this domain, so why should they trust you? It's like if I go, let's say, to a doctor, I will not tell them how to do their job. So now as a designer, I come in and I'm going to tell them how to do their job in that application that they're using, have been using for a decade. So I need to build up some confidence in my abilities and trust. And then from there, I can slowly move forward. And you always will need somebody who can be available, who's interested in you succeeding, right? And that would always be a starting point for me. It's kind of always the same story.
And how do we determine who that is? I mean, you're coming into an environment where you don't know a lot of people. So how do you establish this trust, and how do you find these people who are going to be your spokespersons?
Right. So I think that when you get hired to do something, when you get approached to do something, there is at least one person who is interested in you succeeding. And that's already good news, right? However, what I always would ask that person, are there any other people in the organization? It doesn't matter if they are connected to us, maybe it's a different unit in another part of the world, it doesn't matter. But are there any people who are interested and have been supporting UX efforts in the past? Right? Or maybe there is kind of some people who are just genuinely interested in improving the UX of the entire organization in one way or the other. So because usually you have actually two types of people who are very important for your project. First, it would be your stakeholders, And second, it would be key influencers, people who are usually not even closely related to your project, but who actually desperately want to support you if they'd known that you existed,
Mhm.
right? And I think that these people can have an incredible influence because they can be on a different level, because it might be that a particular unit really deeply cares about the UX. They really have been pushing that envelope. They were trying very, very hard to do it. And so if you establish even something like a guild, UX guild with those people, all of a sudden you will see at least some support. You will not be a loner anymore. And then maybe you can have a conversation with them and they can find more people who can assist you in your beginnings, right? And I mean, at this point, you're just uncovering this landscape. You have no idea what, that mountain that is in front of you. And it will be packed with restrictions, with limitations, and all of that. And it's only just through support. I mean, I think it's always just worth remembering when you come in and you try to do something with design, you are inherently, whether you want it or not, impacting or affecting somebody else who is going to work with this. Maybe somebody who is using another tool has been using another tool for a decade or so. And then you come in and you desperately, well, not desperately, but you're trying to disrupt them by making their life better. But if I come to anybody here in the chat and say, you know what, I know how you should work. I'm going to design this thing a little bit, add a bit of white space over here, change the flow over there. It will be so much better for you. I know what's best for you, right? The first
Mm.
instinct that people have, and it shouldn't be very surprising, all of you would have as well, is to block it, right? The first instinct is to block it. I don't want somebody coming me telling me how to work. However, if you invest, kind of involve them early on in the process, and you say, "Hey, we've been thinking about what to do this. How to maybe improve this? Can we get a bit of feedback from your end, just to, can you guide me through what you're doing, the walk through your interface, or just are there any particular problems that you're experiencing?" Then all of a sudden, if you come back to them a month later, it'll be much more difficult for them to dismiss you because they kind of want you to succeed to help them. That's just a slightly different perspective on it.
Makes sense. Okay, and I would personally love to hear about a particularly complex project for you that you worked on. And okay, you told us about how you would approach it in the beginning, but maybe to tell me more about the actual process you had to do, maybe some strategies that really helped you navigate and manage the complexities.
Yes. Now that's actually a very good point, Sophia, because I think in many ways what I started doing over the last 3 years, 3 years, was actually quite surprising to me. I never wanted to do this, but I ended up doing it.
Mhm.
What that is actually is this attempt to measure UX. And I always thought, when I think about this, I'm like, we are almost magicians, right? We are beautifully creating, crafting those pixels, and then we put these pixels in the world like birds, and then they fly and they make impact and rounds, and it's just, how can you measure that? Isn't it beauty? How can you measure beauty? But in many ways, it turned out that it's not quite true, because what happens to me now is that before I start working on anything, I actually want to make sure that I kind of avoid three things. First, I don't want to waste anybody's time, right? I don't want to come in a meeting and say, okay, we're going to do this, and in the end try to do that and then fail on that, right? I don't want to promise something I cannot deliver, right? I don't want the engineering team to work in a couple of sprints on something that I invented or I decided was changing, and then it changing nothing. I don't want to waste anybody's time. That's number one. Number two, for me, failure is not an option, right? I don't want to be put in a position where somebody comes to me and tells me, you know what, you've been working on this for the last 4 months and it actually got worse, right? That's not a great experience. And
Not-
this I will not be recommended further, right? That's number two. That's something I want to avoid. And third, I want to work on something that has the highest impact, at least potentially, right? That's kind of important to me. For that, I need to understand what is it that we're changing. And so what I tend to do is, whenever we start coming up with ideas, right, we basically start thinking about how do we measure the impact of that idea. And often before that, I'll be bringing in somebody like, I'll be bringing a PM, an engineer on board and say, hey, we're thinking about those ideas. And we have this impact effort metrics. So we basically map impact of what we think it will create versus the effort that we will need to make it happen from the design side and engineering side of things. And we think we should be working on this. Is it viable? And they can participate in that discussion. And they say, well, this is going to take a while. We can do that, but that's probably going to create the dependency. We need to adjust this. So I kind of at least understand, okay, this seems to be viable, but takes effort. This seems to be viable, also not that much effort. So maybe we should try to work on that. And so we try to navigate that space to identify some things that seem to be quite promising. And also early on, before designing a single pixel on the screen, I try to do this sort of concept testing with actual users to put whatever it is that we have in mind in front of them to gather some early feedback about how they feel about it. Of course, it's not real. You just want to get the sentiment, whether they find it useful or not. It's not like a real thing. But I just don't want to waste time working on wireframes or something that might be then thrashed in the bin, because creating wireframes also takes time, right? And so there are also things like kind of model, kind of survey you can use to actually get a sentiment from the user, whether they find a particular feature useful or not. And so this will often be a start. So you basically look, or at least that's what I'm trying to do, basically look at the landscape. You basically look at the user needs and the problem space. You try to identify what is missing, what needs addressing. Then you prioritize those things. You prioritize even more. You prioritize even more in feedback loop with the product manager and also engineers. And then you have some candidates. And then you do the concept testing against users to see if what the sentiment is. And then you come back together with APM and you decide, okay, so this is what we know. These are some of the troubles or problems or user needs that came from research or anything like that. Let's try to figure out what are we going to work on for that sprint or for this quarter or whatever, right? And then we go. That gives me much more confidence. Just one more thing I do before I start designing then is let's attach some metrics to those things that we want to change. So if we, let's say, know that many people feel like they're wasting time in filters, with filters. They can't find the right filters or anything like that. Okay, well, let's maybe identify something like 10 or 12 different representative scenarios that we give to people before and after. Like, for example, if it's a financial application, you are an expert in this particular industry. You're looking for a specific trends in the market for, I don't know, stocks that meet this criteria. Please try to find how it has evolved over the last 5 years. Go. All right. And then you basically get what they say in the beginning and what they do in the end, right? And you look at things like, has the success rate improved? Do they make more mistakes? Do they make fewer mistakes? Something like that. You need to have before and after, right? Otherwise, you cannot measure. And so this already, like really thinking about metrics before I even start designing them, gives me a lot of confidence that there will be, that even if it doesn't drive the success that I wanted to drive, that I will be able to navigate from there because I know what I'm measuring, right? And I can actually bring people in to do that once I made a change, even if it's not implemented yet, but just, mocked up.
Makes sense.
So it might be a little bit fluffy and sounds a little bit weird. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it takes for me usually a lot of time before I start designing, because I think that the one thing that I learned is that it really doesn't matter sometimes that much how exactly it's designed in terms of UI. Like, are we using a drop down here? Are we using I don't know, autocomplete? Are we using buttons? Although I would prefer buttons and stuff like that. But it really doesn't matter as much against the clarity that you probably want to provide. If you make it very, very clear, make it very difficult for people to make mistakes, the UI is a secondary conversation for me then. So that's kind of where I'm navigating.
Okay. So a lot of prep work goes behind it before,
Yep.
just starting. Oh, okay. Good. And sorry.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think we often assume that metrics and measuring UX is almost counterproductive. And I think that from the last couple of years, it really has changed a lot, because I see a lot of teams either trying to figure out what is the definition of design success for their teams. What is it? Is it the velocity of the team? Is it the number of completed Jira tickets? Well, hopefully not, right? What does it mean, design success for our team? So they're trying to figure that out. And on the other hand, what they also try to figure out is what are some of the key performance indicators for design, like design KPIs, something that could be presented to business on their dashboard, because everybody else has their KPIs.
Yeah.
Finance definitely have KPIs. Sales definitely have KPIs. Marketing definitely have KPIs. Recruiting definitely have KPIs. Designers, well, we probably want to think about some KPIs at this point as well. And there are plenty of options to choose from there. So actually recording a video course on just that as well, but that's a separate story.
I would love to see it. But yeah, definitely. Definitely agree that it would help knowing what is the before and what is the after, at least having an idea of what are you chasing after then, how will you measure it as well.
Yeah.
Um,
I think also, if I just may add to it, because it might also be useful for wonderful people here in the chat. There are obviously like a lot of different metrics that you could be using and so on. But for me, the most important is, and it's really, really simple. I cannot emphasize how simple it is. We take a time, like 1 hour, we sit down with our stakeholders. We say, can we discuss what to be some representative tasks that people are performing in our product? 10, 12 of them. Ideally, it should be coming from users, right? But if they don't want to spend too much time on that, well, we have to make it work in some way. Ideally, it would be coming from users, though. So we have 10, 12 tasks. In our product, people do this, this, this. And then what I would try to do is get 15 to 18 people, if you have access to users. If you're not, we can have a separate conversation about that as well. Proxy testing. There could be quite a few things you can do there still. We get 15 to 18 people. You don't need much more than that. We give them these tasks to complete. And we track two things, just two things. First, task success, how successful they are in completing them correctly, right? Second, time that they need to complete these tasks, right? And this gives you a very real, honest, and objective representation about how successful your design work is. And whenever you make any changes, you do the same repeatedly with the same segment of people, different people with the same segment of people, right? Maybe every 4 months, every 5 months, every 6 months. And then you can see that there is a trend in terms of your success rate and also in terms of your time that gets kind of shorter, hopefully. And if you get to the point where your success rate is beyond 80%, like 80%, then you're in a good track. Then you're in a good place, right? But typically, in most environments in which we are working, it starts anywhere at 20 and goes at most to 50 with a lot. And I mean, these are not like, edge case scenarios that we were kind of tricky questions or anything like that. This is stuff that people have to do every day, right? More or less. It's just, this is why they make mistakes and they do things wrong, because they kind of get drawn to wrong conclusions. This is how simple that is. You establish that, you're already in a good notion of UX metrics.
Very good. And now that we have this whole list of things that we are supposed to tackle, how do we prioritize?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things here. I mean, there are different prioritization methods. For example, PMs will be familiar with the RICE method. But for me, Sophia, I like it simple. I like everything that's just applicable to me without too much hassle, simple. So there is this very famous impact effort metrics. I think that somebody in the chat also dropped in, where you basically have impact that you're expecting on the one axis, and then effort that you are expecting as well on the other axis. And you map your ideas as sticky notes across these two dimensions.
Hmm?
And this is just a guesstimate. You're just guessing. You don't know. I mean, you have no idea at this point. But at least as long as you involve the engineers and designers, right, you can get a sense about what it's going to be. It will be inaccurate at times as well, but you still get somewhere. Sometimes I also see one interesting thing happening, because in the past it was mostly engineers, developers who were using story points to estimate the complexity of their work, right? And I see more and more teams where designers actually doing the same, right? Also using story points in the same way, and also doing the planning poker to estimate just what is the complexity, and then they basically know how much they can fit in a sprint, anything like that. So that gives them a sense about how much effort will be required. As of the impact, well, the only thing you can do is, well, guesstimate, I guess, where you can at least get some information from research if it supports it or anything like that. And also another thing you can do is, of course, do this sort of concept testing to bring these ideas to users and get at least some sentiment from them before you even start designing.
Okay. And we mentioned a lot of different people involved in the process. So how do we ensure design remains user-centric when we're dealing with so many stakeholders?
Yes, I think for me, this has been really actually quite tricky because in some projects, I ended up in a situation where there is it feels like you are put in such a complex framework. Like it almost feels like somebody tells you, well, you can do whatever you want, just don't change anything. Right? They're like, right. So let me see how I can do that. I think that maybe some of you here in the chat feel the same way. If you do, please write a plus in the chat. This is almost the story of my life. And what I try to do in that case, I try to make sure that people who I'm working with see my work as enabler or supporter of their work. So I don't want, I don't want us to be under wrong assumptions, but I think in many ways, it's not like we are surrounded by people who want us to fail. I don't believe that. It's not like we have adversaries all around and nobody cares about design and so on. But the problem that I see is that while these people around us are not our adversaries, right, they're not our supporters or allies either. So if they're kind of in between, maybe we can make them our allies. Because, there is often this intention, like we often, this is what the feeling that I'm getting. We always try to hide us, kind of our design work a little. So when there is a big meeting, we kind of present this big final V2 final design, say, this is it. We've done it. This is what it's going to be. And then somebody comes in and says, so why are you doing this here? That doesn't make sense. And then another person comes in. No, that's weird. Like, why do you spend so much time on this? And then before you know it, your design is done. It's not going to be kind of pushed forward. However, if you do it the other way around and you say, okay, let me identify people here who has potentially some interest in me succeeding. Let's have a one-on-one with them. Just hear them out. Hey, I'm here, designer. I'm trying to improve things here. What can I do to make your life a bit better, to enable you to do your work better? Okay, thank you so much for your points. You go to another person. What do you think? Like, how can I help you? So early on, kind of almost like a working group. And then you have these thoughts and ideas and feelings and whatever from all the different departments. Very often you will also uncover some, dark waters, right? Something like sharks in the waters. Like, ooh, you probably shouldn't go to that unit, right? Ooh, you probably shouldn't do this, right? That's very helpful. That's incredibly helpful for me. So I talk to all of them, I establish contact. And then when I do my design work, I try to invest in inviting them at least in some way. And then before that big meeting happens, I talk to each of them again, present to them individually what we've been thinking and why, right? So they also have an opportunity to give me some feedback. And so when it then comes to that big meeting where everybody is invited, it's almost like, I think, a kind of almost Japanese style. You don't have any big surprises there. There are no surprises in a big meeting. When you walk in that meeting, everybody will have seen the major stakeholders will have seen your work. They will have had a chance to give you feedback. They will have had a chance to hear you out and ask questions. So these questions don't appear all of a sudden in the big meeting because they've been answered already. So they have no chance but support you. And if they support you, if there is a question that comes up when somebody has a doubt, well, these people have already kind of supported you, right, at this point. So you have no way to fail. So we shouldn't be defending kind of our precious design. I think just show it to as many people as you can who have a vested interest. And this is how you kind of try to be almost like a monopoly game, I guess, but in a friendly way, where you basically just build allies and turn people who just couldn't care less into your allies by inviting them to have a conversation about how you can help them. That would be kind of my strategy to get there.
Very strategic, very well thought out. I think applicable in every single possible situation ever. So Great. And
Also,
you mentioned briefly when you uncovered dark waters, it can also be helpful, but why?
yeah, because I think in many ways you need to understand as well just what not to do. So,
Mhm.
like for example, what happens very often, and again, dear friends, if it happened to you, please write a plus in the chat as well. Happens to me that when I get a brief, a design brief, I often feel like there is a strong understanding about why people are doing certain things. Like for example, when imagine you're working on a product and it has a premium model that people can buy, premium plan, and then you will have a conversation with your stakeholder and will tell you, well, we know why people sign up for our premium product.
Mhm.
So this is what people like, right? But we ultimately want to have more people who are buying our premium product. Now, what the research usually doesn't cover is why do people not sign up for that premium product, right? It's great that people who did sign up, we can ask them and they can tell us, right? But we rarely know about what stopped people from not doing that, right? And so I think in many ways, when you actually look also at things like in organization where you might have some departments that will do whatever it takes to block the hell out of you because you are disrupting them in a massive way, and this is not like. And in fact, I think in many, I all keep saying in many ways today. That's weird. I think it's one what we should be reminding ourselves of. Design is disruptive. It really is disruptive. So if you start changing the way of how people are working, maybe somebody else, they just were offered a promotion. They just need to hit that milestone in
Mhm.
this quarter to get that promotion, to get to, I don't know, to a new position or whatever. And now you come in and now they have to relearn everything. You're so close. You've been working on this for 2 years. So of course they will not be interested in you, right? In fact, they will do everything they can to maybe at least put you on hold because they have other priorities in place. In the same ways, it could be that, for example, the reason why you're not getting access to users is not at all connected to you not having access to users. I would always ask, can you please tell me exactly why we can't have access to users? I mean, I'm here to help. I'm not here to disrupt, right? And the reason is often political, because, for example, there has been a decision made on a business level that we're going to do that thing. And so the product manager or managers just basically ended up agreeing to that. And then we ended up implementing and designing it. And then we found out that this is a mistake. But no manager will want to be seen as somebody who is coming into the top and saying, this was a problem. We shouldn't have done that, because maybe they also have specific goals that they want to meet. So a lot of this stuff has nothing to do with design, and design never exists in isolation. We always disrupting or supporting, right, the people around us, and people have priorities. When you look at people in an organization, what I see is dogs, children, mortgages, gym memberships, things that are so remote from design. Frankly, they really don't care that much about design. They don't mind it being useful and everything, but they have much bigger priorities in life, and design or helping you succeed in design is a part of the job, and it's not as important as some other things in life are. And that's fine, because nobody expects us to be kind of in a privileged position to be really recognized as the most important ones. We don't know how other people work, and they don't know how we work and what is important to either side. So that's just life.
It's true. That's true. And I wouldn't want to rush our conversation, but as we are nearing the Q&A, I before we jump into that, everyone, if you haven't already, just post your questions. But I would love to know a little bit more about what are some of your favorite tools that you, or techniques that you would recommend everyone who is listening today to really effectively manage um, and design complex systems, right?
Sure. I think, I mean, I don't know if it counts, because frankly, I've been working with teams who are using Adobe XD. I've been working with teams who are using Figma. I've been working with teams who are using anything really. So I don't have a particular preference in terms of like the specific tools that I'm using, but I would say that there are certain things that really did help on a strategic level, I think. First of all, I think it's worth keeping one Google document that highlights, if you're working in a team or if you're working for a client or whatever, that highlights all the incredible work that you are doing behind the scenes as well. So if you want to get a promotion, I think it's worth understanding that it's really rare that people get noticed and then they are promoted because of what is being noticed. You probably
Yeah.
will have one-on-one, and in that one-on-one, you will have to present what you've been working on and why you deserve it. And I would say that it's worth really be very careful about that, because managers change all the time. Whenever a new manager comes in, they have no idea who you are and why you actually deserve a promotion. You might tell to them, well, I've been working on this and been championing this, but they will have a policy probably which will prohibit them from promoting anybody within the first 6 weeks and or 6 months or maybe even the whole year. So you will need to wait, and then a new manager will come in and you're in the same door, in the same area again. So you need to have really an ongoing document which represents what you've been working, ideally with testimonials from superiors and whatnot. That's one thing that's very helpful. The other thing that's also very helpful is to keep your stakeholders kind of stay in touch with them. And what I mean by that is almost every second or so week, I try to record a short video, 1 minute, maybe 1.5 minute video, where I'm basically highlighting what is the work that we've been doing in the design space. And this is why, and these are the decisions we're making. Not only is it kind of documentation for me, right? But also to them. So I send it to them. They can watch it. They can skip it. It doesn't matter. But it feels like you are making progress. I don't want, again, to be in a position where somebody comes to me and tells me, so what is that design project now? It's been now 2 months. Are we getting somewhere? So instead, I basically send an update as a short video preview about this is what we've been thinking. This is what we've been working on. And that really helps. That really did help change things, because in many ways it felt like you were just sitting there doing your thing. Beyond that, I think the best skill, the best technique that I can only recommend is to get a little bit more understanding about information architecture.
Mhm.
That I was lacking for a long period of time. The taxonomies and everything, that was really helpful just to create a better information architecture. There's also a wonderful free book by, I'll have to drop it at some point, send a link to you later,
Sure,
uh,
we can.
which is available as well. So that's fantastic. And also maybe just one more thing I want to really emphasize is that, yes, I think one of those things that really helped me to get in a place where I started to get a more confidence, more comfort, I guess, in designing, is to actually show my work early. Like even very early, when there is nothing, when there is just a really poor sketch or anything of that. This, for a very long period of time, I was basically trying to hide it until I actually get to the point where it's presentable, and then I would just waste time. That's just a waste of time. There is no harm in showing something that's early. That's okay. You get some feedback, and that's also worth something. So that would be probably my top 4 or top 5. I'm not sure which ones there, how many there were.
Top four, and four amazing advices, especially because I think that we forget how to, yeah, establishing trust is important, but also showing people what we are doing and advocating for ourselves is also important. So I love that advice, and thank you so much for sharing
Sure,
it.
of course.
Yeah, so finally, for the audience watching, I see that they have a lot of a lot of questions here. So we can maybe do a few.
Sure.
If you agree, let me just pick out what
Thank you
we
so
have.
much, everyone, for submitting your question. That's very exciting. I can't wait.
Let's do Daria. Daria says, how does prioritization such as impact after matrix or rise help with ensuring UX scalability and consistency? You love consistency while navigating dependencies. So,
Those are the main issues that designers face.
Mhm.
Yes. Um, so let me see how I can answer this. I think um, I think that when it comes to dependencies, the best thing we can do is to try to uncover them early. So that often means that there are multiple sessions for those kind of prioritization thing, multiple stages, if you like. Indeed, you're totally right in the fact that how can you actually estimate the effort and potentially also the impact if there are many dependencies that you might not aware of and that you have to identify first. Well, you have to be kind of start somewhere. I think that sometimes we have a situation where we just need a bit of time to estimate a bit better, because if you start breaking down what a particular task involves, then you start breaking down and then you estimate its individual parts, right? That's probably the best thing you can do. But I think that very often it is indeed, and you're totally right on this, Daria, it's more of sometimes this combination of a gut feeling um, based on what we know is the problem, right? But you cannot know. I mean, at this point, it's like every estimate. The more you know about this problem, the more you know about this environment in which you happen to be, the better you'll be able to more or less prioritize better, right? But you cannot do it kind of with a certainty. I think one issue that does help there is to see how this has been done in the past and learn from that. I think that many teams are going in this direction where when they estimate, let's say in story points, they always keep track of how they were estimating in the past, and then they're projecting not projecting in the future, but they actually um, they see how accurate they were or not, again, in those retrospective sessions. And then that's probably the best thing you can do. But you're totally right. This is very challenging. We had a project once where this was really a big deal breaker. And in the end, we totally underestimated the effort there and we missed the deadline, right? So I don't think I have a perfect answer to that question, I think. Very good point, Daria.
No need for a perfect answer. Andrea, what do you do when you don't have access to users? So we briefly mentioned that, but perhaps.
Sure. So there are a few things. First, I would always ask, dear whoever, can you please explain why we don't have access to users? Now, there might be some good reasons for that. There might be no users yet, right? And you cannot just go ahead and do some usability testing with some prospect users because of IP, intellectual property, regulations, NDA, and whatnot, those kind of concerns. So that's perfectly fine. Then you don't have access to users, indeed. The best thing you can do then is to find people who are the closest. So there are different levels to that. On the one hand, that depends on how strict your regulations are, what you can do, what you cannot do. If you cannot just find people who are kind of interested in this space, who are working in that space where this product lives, what you can at least try to do is to find domain experts who understand that domain, so you can at least uncover some of their needs without speaking too much about what the product does. Now, sure, you can also get this response that, well, we don't have money for that, because domain experts are usually quite expensive. Well, what you can do then is to try to find somebody who actually remotely understands that domain. Maybe you have somebody like a success team or sales team or even marketing team, right? In fact, it's not uncommon these days to find that researchers, UX researchers, are sitting within marketing teams or sales teams or customer success teams rather than actually UX teams, because they are important there. So you might want to go there. And in fact, you could potentially try to get to users if you don't have access to them, but they exist, via this proxy testing by saying, hey, can I maybe just jump in one of the call with the customer success team? Just silently and just see what it's like, what they're talking about. Maybe you can even ask a few questions. Maybe they can ask a few questions for you. That's also could be an option. So you could go that route. If that's out of question, what you also can do is to find people who are the closest. Then I would say, let's have a maybe interview session or so that we're going to run together with customer success team or sales. Let's see what they have to say. What do they know about the users? What have they learned about users? Marketing needs to know the users because they're probably going to, they're trying to speak to them, right? So this would be kind of my ways. I mean, it always reminds me of this wonderful metaphor by H. Locke, who wrote an article on Medium recently. And he said, well, you do what you can, but if you look at a problem from different perspective of your customer success team, perspective of your search logs, perspective of Google Trends, right? Perspective of what people leave in reviews, all the different perspectives. Eventually, you try to shed the light on the truth in the middle. And so the more you look from different perspectives, even although you cannot look at that perspective right in the middle, which is staring at you, the user space, you can at least try to understand something. And then if you even get access to a few users, eventually you can see if this is right or not, right? So that would be kind of my path there.
Great. And I have a couple of questions that are relating to no data. So I will just pick up, this is part one to
Sure.
introduction of the topic. So in the point of arguing with higher stakeholders, you said use strategies and gather support, such as data driven, to talk with them. But what do we do when there is no such data? Everything is based on the wishes of the stakeholder. What should be done? Or
Yes.
let's say what can be done.
Yes, that's a good point, Dika. Thank you so much for bringing this up as well. I think there is always this notion when you have to start somewhere, right? And usually it would be called either the foundational testing or the baseline testing, right? Because ultimately what we're looking for are four different states that we want to achieve, right, with our work. First, we need to understand where we started. If we start from the very start, we need to understand where we are right now. So if there is no data yet, let's try to identify what we need to collect, what we want to collect, and how we do that, because it will require quite some effort. Either from a data team, engineering team, they need to install some way of tracking, well, gathering some information. It could also be, if it's UX researchers, they also need to understand what they want to do. If there are no UX researchers, then it might be you doing that in the end, right? So there is one thing. So there's a baseline. Then there is basically, as you keep going, there is a current state eventually. Hopefully, you will never go below the threshold on the baseline because you're trying to improve. So you have a baseline where you started, current state where you are, well, future state where you want to be, and additionally to that, what you probably also want to have. And that's what you can start already at this point when you have no data at all, is try to look into benchmark study. Like, what is the state of things in other companies, especially, and that would be helpful, with your main competitors? Maybe there is some research that they have done about excellence award in accessibility or UX or anything like that. So you need to kind of know where you are in that market, where you're competing with other products in the same space. So if you don't have any data, you kind of probably have to start somewhere. And in fact, establishing at least some sort of measurements here and there in the very beginning, it's not that challenging. You can start with something really simple. Like, for example, there is a CES score, customer effort score, where you basically just ask a question after somebody tried to complete a task. How easy or how difficult was it? That's one prompt, and that's not difficult to bring in, to add. That's not hard, right? There are a couple of things like that which will at least give you some sense about where you are. If you have nothing, you have to start somewhere. That would be probably my start.
Okay. And before the darkness consumes you completely, Vitaly.
Oh, I
Let's
can turn on the lights. There is light here. There is light. No?
It's fine, no worries. We will go over one more question, and that's on showing your work early. So, how are little perfectionists? How do we know when the work is really presentable? I've heard the concept of constantly keeping your work shareable, but do you have a practical tip on this? Tere asks.
Yeah, very good point, Terry. Thank you so much for asking. In fact, there is this notion of saying, okay, we're going to work on this Figma, and clients always have access to it, so they can always tap in. Well, that I would say is a little bit dangerous, right? Because then they will come a lot and they will leave a lot of comments. Sometimes they will be leaving also very disruptive comments or very contradicting comments. So that's a little bit worrying. I would say it's probably good to have like these moments when you present it. And I think I would try to attach it to some sort of like a minor milestones. And I would do it in a way that when I know that there is a particular problem, I need to break it down into steps that I'm going to take in order to, solve this problem. And so whenever I hit a milestone, like small milestone, like we agreed with designers on the team that we will take this approach, right? And we are going to do it this way. Okay, there is no proper mock-up or anything. It just basically could be a paper mock-up or could be a wireframe, low fidelity wireframe. It doesn't matter. That's a good timing, right? Because at this point you want to see, so this is how it's going to work, like on a level of skeleton almost. There is no actual UI at all. You can definitely show that, right? And then eventually, of course, there will be this question about how will it actually be kind of in terms of interaction. So you probably want to maybe create this interactive prototype that you can show potentially if you want to. And then eventually you will be a question about the UI. What will it actually look like? So presentable to me is everything that hits a particular milestone, right? So it doesn't have to be perfect at all. It can be just a sketch or anything similar. But I would say, break it down into milestones, because eventually you probably will be getting a sign off from that client of yours saying, okay, that seems to be fine. This is the timeline that we can commit to. That's okay, right? Let's do this. And then you can present it. And I think also one thing that I would probably be very cautious about, I would try to make it very clear from the very early on, around, especially when you show the work early, I would make it very clear from the very beginning that any late changes that come in just before the deadline will probably delay the project and cost extra. You don't have to charge extra. Maybe you're not in a position to do that. But I think that what I learned is that often stakeholders or people who are just not designers, they just don't understand that asking for what seems to be a small change in the end of the project is such a big deal for designers. Well, they don't know that it must be responsive. They don't know that it must be accessible. They don't know all of the things that a minor change might affect, right? So probably want to tell them that, late changes, late scope changes can be really difficult, very time consuming, and can delay projects and cause extra resources or efforts. So try to make that very clear. And, when it comes to presentable milestone, just hitting a milestone, and kind of make it almost like a cadence where you say, okay, if a project is going for 2 months, I'm going to present something every week or every 2 weeks, right? So that's fine. Nobody's expecting you to deliver a final result in a week.
Great. Unfortunately, I have
Oh no.
We could go on forever, right? But I will have to stop us now before we stay here the whole day. But yeah, Vitaly, I really wanted to thank you for joining us today and for sharing your advice and your expertise today. I think it's amazing, and I think that people who have joined us, and you all, thank you so much for joining, and I hope that they will be, walking away with some new knowledge and practical tips. I know I am, and I know that if they have been taking notes, they will as well. So it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and everybody else as well. Let's connect on LinkedIn and whatnot. Where do people connect these days? I guess LinkedIn, maybe.
For sure. Follow Vitaly on LinkedIn. He's got great advice and tips, shares almost every day, if not every day. Follow him if you'd like to stay connected with us for other events coming up. Join our community on Discord. It's discord.gg/Uxcel. I'll be waiting for you there. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, for being here. And I hope I will see you again next time.
Thanks so much for coming, everyone. And thank you so much for having me, Sophia. See you next time. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day.